Hey, Scott, Sambucci here, and it is time for episode number 2 of our Go Farther podcast series. So, first and foremost, you might be hearing a little bit of hoarseness in my voice. It is a Monday morning when I'm recording this, and spent the weekend at my son's soccer tournament. I coach his soccer club team. It's a group of 11 and 12-year-olds, and we spent the whole weekend on a field playing 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. And as you might imagine, that involves just a bit of voice across the field trying to rally 11 and 12-year-olds on the field, off the field, keeping them all collected. So apologize for that, but hopefully by our next episode, that will be cleared up. So let's dig in. Let's talk about the Go Farther series. So this is episode number 2 in the series that we're running this spring, and I'm so excited to be bringing this to you. Everything that I want to do with this Go Farther podcast series is really just share my personal experience so that something that might be helpful or useful for you that you can apply or adopt and then adapt into your business, into your life, into whatever else other places that you want to apply it might be helpful for you. So I really want to stress that everything I'm doing here or sharing here, like nothing here is designed to be a prescription or designed to be a checklist or you must do it this way, or you have to do it that way. Over the years that I've been sharing videos, blog posts, teaching at webinars, teaching at workshops, there are folks that constantly tell me, like, I love when you share these stories of your personal experience because it helps me see things in a new way. And that's all I want to do here. I'm not, nothing here is designed to be like, here is the playbook. You must do these things. It's really just about sharing my experiences so that hopefully something in here might be helpful for you. So let's dig into episode number 2 here. And the concept that we're talking about here with the Go Farther series is how do we do more, how to be happy, and how to surprise yourself. And over the years, there's a really simple, way to get started for me, and that is go with one crazy idea. So that's what I want to talk about today. Go with one crazy idea. And when I think about this, really, it's about putting myself in a situation to just do hard things. And every time I've done that, it really just begins with, hey, I've got this idea. I want to do this thing. And what I found is that the more I do hard things, the easier those hard things get. So just think about business when you run across people that have been serial entrepreneurs and they have had multiple successful companies or multiple successful exits. The first one was probably the hardest. And in fact, the first 1 or 2 or 5 may have completely failed. But because they kept putting themselves in that situation, they learned that every time they want to do something hard to create something from nothing, which is what you're doing when you're running and building a business, it becomes easier because you learn more as you implement. You start to identify some patterns, and each time those hard things become a little bit easier because you start to see things in the past. And so just share a couple of ideas here from, or a couple of experiences, just using like my experiences physically doing different races or other endurance events or other sort of physical journeys I've taken. So, for me, a couple of examples that come to mind are when I started doing Ironman triathlons, then competed in Uberman, then ran my first Tahoe 200 endurance run. Then I took on what's called a fastest known time challenge, an FKT. So just share a few of those, and hopefully something in here might be helpful for you. So I'll start with Uberman because Uberman is a race that kind of spawned this whole concept for me of Go Farther. Uberman is something I've talked about in the past, and just to quickly recap, the concept of Uberman was a multi-day triathlon. So there are ultra marathons, which are races that are past 26.2 miles. Well, there's a guy named Dan Burku down in Southern California years ago that decided he wanted to put together an ultra triathlon, an ultra Ironman, if you will. So a typical Ironman triathlon is a 2.4-mile swim, followed by a 112-mile bike, followed by a marathon run, 26.2 miles. And that's designed to be done in a day's time. In fact, the cutoff time, I think, is 17 hours. The top pro athletes are now completing this in under 8 hours, and then us amateurs are going anywhere from, 9 to 17 plus hours to complete this, right? And so Dan looked at that and said, like, what if we did an ultra triathlon. And so what he did is he put together this incredibly insane, crazy course where the swim was 21 miles, a swim across the Catalina Channel, which is considered one of the seven great swims for those in the marathon swimming world, followed by a 400-mile bike ride from Los Angeles through into Death Valley in Southern California. And then the run was a 135-mile ultra marathon that was the same as the Badwater ultra marathon course from the lowest point in the continental US, which is a little place called Badwater, up to the portal at Mount Whitney, which is a 14,000 foot peak. So the portal starts at about 9,000 feet. So just this crazy long race. And so that's really where all of this concept of Go Farther had started for me. And so I'd done triathlons, I'd done an ultra marathon, a 50-mile ultra marathon, and I'd done at that point 3 Ironmans. And that concept came up for me, that idea. It wasn't even my idea. And this is an important thing to stress when you're looking at this idea of like, how do I find one crazy idea and then just go? It doesn't have to be your idea. I mean, yes, you could start a business and look at a situation or look at a business opportunity or look at a problem within an industry and say, like somebody ought to fix that. And that somebody's going to be me. Well, sure, that can be your concept, your idea. However, it doesn't always have to be that way. And so for me, this concept of Uberman, which is like, this is one crazy idea, somebody else's idea, but I'm just going to go. I'm going to sign up for this thing. I'd never done longer than a 50-mile ultra marathon. I'd never done longer than an Ironman triathlon. I certainly hadn't done, a 21-mile swim. I hadn't done a 400-mile bike. I hadn't done a 135-mile ultra marathon, but it was something I wanted to see what was possible, right? So we talk about this concept of Go Farther. It's like, I'm going to pick something crazy and just go and make that happen. Now, I didn't finish the race. What was important to me wasn't finishing the race, or certainly not even winning the race. It was, I wanted to see how far I could push myself. And through that experience in 2016, that's what actually served as a base of learning for a lot of other things that I started to do, both personally and professionally. So an example of that is the first Tahoe 200 ultra marathon that I ran. So in 2017, so Uberman was 2016, 2017, I had been, after Uberman, just the following year, I was really in a good spot physically, mentally, where I was able to train a lot. I started switching over to some longer distance running. Over the summer in 2017, I ran a 60K race, which is, I don't know what the exact math is. A 50K is 31 miles, so it would be like 35-mile race. And that went really, really well. Like, I felt strong. I had a great time. And so coming out of that race in July, I was kind of like feeling strong. And, it was early August and thinking to myself, like, man, I've created this fitness level for myself. Like, what's ahead? And I didn't have any other races scheduled for myself. And so there's a website called Ultra Sign Up, and it's a place where you can just go and search ultra marathon races and a lot of other types of endurance races. And I remember laying in bed one night in early August and just sorting and searching for, what could be a race that I could do. So I'm laying there in bed and searching through this website, and my wife comes into the bedroom just to, collect some stuff or whatever. And she looked at me and she said, "What's up?" I said, "I think I found my next race." And she said, "Oh, really? Tell me about it." I said, "It's called the Tahoe 200. It's in September." And she said, "The Tahoe 200, what does that mean?" I said, "It's a 200-mile race. It's a 200-mile ultra marathon." And she said, "It's in September?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, so you want to do that next year?" I said, "No, I'm going to do it this year." It was literally like 5 or 6 weeks away. I just looked at this race and just decided, go. This was my one crazy idea. I'm going to go. I knew I had at least a good base of fitness. I felt like this is something I could pursue. And most importantly, going into it, as I was thinking about going into this race, I was like, well, look, worst case scenario, I'm just going to be able to see how far I can go. Even if I don't finish the race, I could see if I could get to 60 miles or 100 miles or farther. And that in itself would be an opportunity for me to stretch myself. And so for the next 5 weeks, all I did was to prepare us. obviously I started training a little bit more as much as I could within a short period of time. I started listening to podcasts about these kinds of races, these long distance races, started reading blog posts, started gearing up. I was listening to the kind of gear that people had with trekking poles and certain kinds of running shoes, backpacks, all of that stuff. And I just started to assemble this plan for myself to go and do this race. Now, it turns out I ended up finishing that race. It took me, I think my time was around 83, 84 hours. So it's, 3.5 days that it took me, but I finished. And I remember thinking during that race, after I got through the first 65 or so miles, it brought me through to the first kind of big, huge rest stop in a place called Sierra Tahoe. And I remember thinking to myself, if I don't go like another mile, I've already done more than I've ever done before. I've already done 100K, 100 kilometers, I've already done 60 miles. My longest distance race before was a 50-mile ultra marathon. So I've already won. I've already succeeded in that sense. And that's the beautiful thing about this idea of just go, like pick something and choose one crazy idea. Because even along the way, if you don't finish the race, like I didn't finish Uberman, I learned something about myself. I pushed myself. I learned what my limits were. And most importantly, I learned that I had much farther limits than I thought possible. And the same with with that first 200. So I already felt happy. I had already felt like I'd accomplished something. I had already surprised myself just by getting to that first major checkpoint. And even better, as I continue to just move along and follow my race plan, I did finish the race. And so I was really excited and really proud about that. So it's just like one quick example of how you just pick something and go, and then work backwards in order to figure out how you're going to get there. The second example is what's called an FKT, a fastest known time. So in 2020, pandemic hits. 2020 was the year I was originally scheduled to run the Western States 100. So I was able to get a spot in the race. The Western States 100, it's a race with about 350 or so spots every year. There's usually between now 6, 7, 8,000 people trying to get one of those 300 spots through lotteries and exemptions and other ways of getting into the race. And so I actually earned my way into the race because our running club here in Davis, has one spot available to them each and every year because our running club runs one of the aid stations. So as a way of saying thank you from the race organizers, they give one spot to the club, and then the club provides that one spot to the person who's earned it based on their participation in the club, doing things for the running community. And so over the years, I had done enough work, volunteering to clear trails, working at different aid stations, helping out other runners. I had a board seat on the running club. So putting a lot of time and effort to earn that spot. And that's what availed me to the opportunity of running this race. But as we all know, 2020 pandemic hit. And so the race was canceled. And I found out about that, early March. In some ways, I was thankful that the race was canceled because it would have been really difficult to train, obviously, with everything happening in the pandemic. But I was sort of left feeling like, man, like I had kind of geared up after, literally 10 years of trying to get into this race. Now it was a little bit of a disappointment on top of all the things that were happening with the pandemic. And so I thought to myself, well, what can I do here? I mean, what can I do with myself? And so in May, I decided on my 47th birthday that year, I was going to run 47K. So I ran a 47-kilometer self-created course I got up early on my birthday, went out and ran 47 kilometers. And that was just a way for me to just make sure I was staying fit during the pandemic. Wasn't beautiful, wasn't fast, but I got it done. Right. So now I'm thinking, okay, now what? What do I do? And so in the summer of 2020, we drove up to Boise, Idaho, where my parents and my wife's parents live, and to visit them. And I remember sitting in this Airbnb, and I was just kind of scanning my phone, scanning through Facebook, and I saw this press release. And it was a press release of another ultra runner that had talked about this attempt that this guy had to try to run the Western States 100 course out and then back, meaning that it was a 200-mile going through the Western States 100 course and then turning around and going back. It's called an FKT, a fastest known time. And this is a whole genre of ultra running and other types of endurance races where people pick a course. It could be self-made, self-created, or it could be on a designated course. And the idea is like, what's the fastest known time? What's the FKT? And so it turns out nobody had ever logged an FKT for this 200-mile out and back on the Western States course. Obviously, tons of people have done the 100 because it's a fixture in the race calendar every year. But nobody had ever done the 200-mile version of it, and this guy had tried to do it. He was unsuccessful. He got to about a mile, 130, and it was a huge accomplishment. And the press release was sort of talking about his efforts in doing this. And so I saw this, and I had the same feeling that I had when I saw Uberman pop up and when I saw Tahoe 200 pop up. And I thought, didn't have to be my idea, but it was certainly a crazy idea. And my wife, same thing, walks in the room. She's like, "What's up?" And then I said, check out this press release. I showed it to her. She looked at me and I said, "I'm going to do that." And she, of course, was like, "Okay, here we go." And the idea was like, "Okay, when?" Well, for me, I decided I was going to do it. I was going to make that attempt in October. So this is in July. And I said, in October, I want to give this an attempt. Same thing. I didn't win. I didn't complete the race. I got to about mile 70 and I had an injury that I had sustained during training. So I was training for this race, for this FKT in August, had a massive ankle sprain. And so for the last 5 to 6 weeks, I basically was training on a badly sprained ankle, taping it up every day, icing it, ibuprofen, all that stuff. But really it just wasn't healed. And so I went out and did the attempt at the FKT anyway. And by the time I got to mile 70, because the ankle sprain on my left foot created so much pressure on my right leg, I ended up creating some Achilles problems in my right leg. So mile 70 rolls around. I get through the first 70 miles, took a couple hours of sleep overnight, and then started the next morning, and I just couldn't go. Just couldn't go. I remember feeling massively disappointed. I was with a couple of my friends who were helping to pace me at the time. And, they knew I was struggling with the injury. I was telling them this is not working. And they said, well, let's just keep going a couple more miles. Let's go up the next hill. Let's see how you feel. It just wasn't going to work. There's no way I was going to get it, even to the 100-mile mark without risk of significant injury. And so I remember that moment where I just turned to Kelly and turned to Katie. I'm like, it's over. And even now, as I think about that, I feel this emotion of, man, I didn't want it to be over because I felt great physically otherwise. And it was hard. Right? It's difficult. And so we turned around, we got back to a pickup spot. My wife came, we dropped me off, we got home. But I remember sitting in the garage unpacking, and I was just covered in dust and dirt. And my wife took a picture of me with my ankle taped, and I'm sitting there unpacking my stuff. And I just looked up there and smiled with this big dusty face. And I remember thinking to myself, I tried it. I did, like, at least I went for it. And I felt happy with that attempt because I went from total idea, trying to figure out what I'm going to do with myself for the year, not being able to do any races because everything was shut down in the pandemic, to going and attempting a fastest known time. And during the training, my son was so excited for me. He said, "So if you actually do this, is that like a world record?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess it would be in a sense, a world record." And he's like, "Wow, that's really cool." And he felt that disappointment with me. He even consoled me and he hugged me. He's like, "That's okay, Dad. You tried really hard." That meant a lot to me, of course. So I got to experience that moment with him simply because I chose to do something that was really hard, which was built on the foundation of doing other ultras and doing Ironman triathlons. So again, like, I'm just sharing all this with you because I want to share what has worked for me, and hopefully something in here might be applicable to what you're doing. And what it comes down to for me, as I was thinking about this morning, like, what's the main getaway here, the main takeaway here? And the word frontiers came to mind for me, frontiers. And we think about like where we are as a human race. There's not a whole lot left to explore in some ways. I mean, yes, there's the deep ocean, and yes, there's deep space, and there's, a vast amount of places to explore in that sense. But it's not like, 100 years ago or 200 years ago where there was the true frontier. We were finding new lands, we were finding new oceans, we were finding new bodies of water, discovering new mountains that hadn't existed. And that was something that as humans on a day-to-day basis, a lot of people are just going and doing, right? You just go west, young man. Let's go stake our claim in the ground and like let's go out to the frontier. There's in a lot of ways that doesn't really exist for us as humans anymore. And so the humans, or I should say the frontiers that are left are almost self-created in a lot of ways. Like we have to create these frontiers for ourselves and then pursue them. We have to embark on our own adventure every day or every week, every month, every year. It doesn't matter that those frontiers are contrived or fabricated. For me, it's in a sense fabricated because, oh, there's a Tahoe 200, or there's this course that could be a fastest known time, or this guy, Dan, that decided he was going to put together an ultra triathlon, or now it's training for me Brazilian jiu-jitsu and deciding like my next frontier is to be a black belt by age 60. It's not that any of these are truly unique. What makes them unique is that they're for me. They're unique to me. And so that frontier is something that's new for me. And that's what matters. Because like, to me, I feel like we have to keep creating and finding these frontiers. It could be the same for you, whether it's starting a business or growing your business. You're not the first person to start a business. Writing a book, you wouldn't be the first person to write a book. It could be a family trip to Japan or the Serengeti. Millions of people have done that. It could be, learning to snowboard or play the piano. Like any of these things that are just thoughts. It doesn't have to be a unique, crazy idea. It just has to be our crazy idea. And then once we find that one crazy idea, what we have to do is just go. You just have to go. You have to decide. And then you can work backwards. Once you choose what that thing is going to be, you can work backwards. It's like a puzzle or a maze. I know a lot of times in puzzle books, right? There's Sudokus and mazes and word finds and those kinds of things. When I see a maze, for me, the way I solve a maze is I start at the end and I work backwards. I find that to be way easier than starting at the beginning and going forwards and then hitting lots of dead ends. If I start from the backwards, I find for some reason it seems to feel easier to solve that puzzle or to solve that maze than moving forward. And that's why it's so important to just pick that one crazy idea and go. So the best part is when you choose that idea, it's the journey along the way is where a lot of times you'll experience that joy. So when I'm out training for a race, that journey is what avails me to the opportunity to find bear tracks or mountain lion tracks, or to come across a rattlesnake on a trail, to see a family of deer bounding across a meadow first thing in the morning as the sunrise is coming up. It's to see a bald eagle out there, like to see these things that I haven't seen before, or going for a long distance swim. When I remember one of the most memorable parts about doing Uberman was during the swim on the Catalina Channel, and we left shore at 4 a.m. We pushed off, and it's dark. You literally can't see anything because you're in the middle of the freaking ocean. There's really no ambient light. All I could see was the kayak with glow sticks and a flashlight. And then I had some glow sticks around my neck in case I got separated, they could go find me. And you push off the shore and you start swimming. And it was about 2.5 hours into this swim that the sun started to rise over my right shoulder. And I remember seeing the false daylight and then the sunrise and the sun peeking over the ocean. And at that moment, I realized that the length of time it was going to take me to swim, my estimated time was about 14 or 15 hours. And I remember thinking at that moment, well, it's 6:30 in the morning now. I left at 4 a.m. So if all goes well, I'll finish around 6 or 7 o'clock p.m. And that's about the time that the sun was going to set. And I remember thinking at that moment, the clock for me is the sun. The sun is going to be going up over my head. At some point midday, it's going to be straight above. And the second half of the day, it's going to be setting. And by the time that sun sets is about the time I should be hitting shore. And I remember just watching the sun all day long as I'm swimming across the ocean. I remember another moment where I could hear in the middle of the ocean, we stopped for a moment and I could hear this clicking and clacking, and I couldn't place the sound. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't anything, a sound that I'd ever heard before. And my wife was on the main support boat. So we had a kayak and then a main support boat. And she said, there are hundreds of dolphins around you, swimming around you right now. Like she could see them from the boat. I couldn't see them because I was down in the water with the swales and the waves. But I remember thinking, like, this is such a beautiful moment for me to be out in the middle of nature and see the sun and see and hear these dolphins, or for my wife to experience that. So as you're pursuing these crazy ideas, it's not just the end point that matters. In fact, the end point matters the least. What matters is along the way is where the experiences happen. And if and when you do hit that end point and you peek over the horizon, you hit that frontier that is your end point for that one crazy idea, it's actually not the end. It's just like getting, where is the end of the universe? Does it really exist? Well, you get to the end of that frontier and you realize that you get over that hill or you get over that hump or you hit the frontier, there's another mountain there off in the distance. There could be another huge body of water, a whole new ocean for yourself. It could be another huge field or a desert or a pile of rocks that you have to figure out how to negotiate. So it's when you get to that end point is when you realize that the next adventure could be starting for you. And when I look back over all of those one crazy ideas that I did, going from, a basic like Olympic distance triathlon to a 70.3 race, a half Ironman, to running multiple Ironmans, to putting myself in a position to do Uberman, and then the Tahoe 200, and then the second 200-mile race, and then doing these FKTs, and now training jujitsu. It's all about how do we keep pushing ourselves? How do we create that one crazy idea that actually leads to the next and the next and the next? And every time we pursue that one crazy idea, it's an opportunity to learn and to grow and to build a foundation for the next thing over and over and over so that it does become easier each time to pick that next new crazy idea. So that's what keeps me moving. That's what keeps me motivated. It allows me to be my best self. My wife tells me this is how I express myself, is by taking on these crazy ideas. And so find that one crazy idea for yourself, whatever that is, go after it, right? Find the idea, find that adventure, find another opportunity. And I promise you, you will be able to do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. Go farther.